But when our cells need to repair and replicate, which they're doing all the time, like, for example, the rods and cones in our eyes, those cells, they're being replicated every 48 hours.
Wow.
The cells in the lining of your stomach, every 3 days, they're new cells. The skin that you're in now is 6 weeks old. In 6 weeks' time, you're going to be in a completely new skin. Okay. And so for our cells to undergo this process of repairing and replicating, they don't just need minus 25 millivolts, they need minus 50 millivolts. So they need twice as much voltage. So what's often missing with the current view of cellular health, many people are familiar that it needs the right nutrients and we need to get toxins out. But there's a third component, and that is we need the right voltage. Because if we don't have the right voltage, then the cells don't have what they need to do their repair and replicating process.
Right, we have Ashoka Houlahan today with us, the founder of Quantum Uplift, which is an often described wellness center of the next generation. And his background actually is a chemical engineer. And, as Einstein said, if you can't explain a really complex circumstance to a 4-year-old, then you haven't understood it really properly. And I think there's a lot of truth in it. And when I think about the stuff that I really understand, it still is a different level to bring it down to a level that I can explain it to everyone within a minute or so. Ashoka has that ability by being extremely brainy, being a chemical engineer, and has a big heart, of course, as well. And so he's hugely interested in the metaphysics and in the quantum physics, which are all part of the foundation of his center, his wellness center here in Byron. And he was diagnosed with a chronic health condition that sort of grounded him for over 7 years, and he declined any use of pharmaceutical drugs, and found basically his way to alternative medicine, or let's say just other ones, because I think alternative is a little bit overused, and not really alternative, it's just not the mainstream that people call the mainstream. I think the mainstream shifts a lot from reactive medicine to more preventative medicine, actually, and just looking for peak performance and all of that at the same time as well. So he has come a long way, learned a lot about all these different modalities, that at the end he's absolutely happy and healed and can now share his knowledge. And so it's actually a blessing that he was so ill, because I think otherwise the drive might have been not quite as strong to really figure out how can we actually help each other with newer technologies or other technologies that are at the moment not necessarily in the core of our health system. So, yeah, Ashoka, welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, so excited to have you here. And it's so nice that you're actually living in this area as well, because I feel we're really hotspot in Australia, right, when it comes to all these different newer technologies or rediscovered technologies, huh?
Yeah, I think Byron is this, it's often described as a wellness destination. So people travel literally from around the world to come to, where we live. Yeah. Fortunately, and for their wellness journey, and there's a rich, diverse number of different practitioners here that can pretty much help everyone, I think.
Yeah. Now we're really fortunate, and besides, it's an absolute beautiful place to come to as well, which really helps with healing as well. Yeah. So Ashoka, the Quantum Uplift Center is something that probably was in the making for quite some years. How did you get into all these different technologies and the different principles that you apply to help the body heal itself?
My journey into the wellness industry, I never saw it coming. It wasn't something that I intellectually mapped out. It's something that I just happened to find myself in through having to solve my own health challenge. And I think, my background was in chemical engineering, so I've got a good understanding of, physics, chemistry, maths and things like that. That's created that foundation there. But, what drove me to, or what brings me to where we are today is the fact that I had a chronic condition for 7 years, which was depression. And as part of that journey, originally I didn't know I had depression, and I was in a lot of denial about depression. And, what coincided with depression was an alcohol dependency. I was at a rock bottom period in my life. I was like 10 kilos overweight. I was incredibly sick because I was going back a number of years. I had a really bad case of the flu, and I was like really, really sick with the flu. And, I went and saw my doctor, and he said, well, look, we can give you drugs for that, or we can give you psychotherapy. And none of those options really appealed to me. And so for me, I've always had a spiritual background, and I decided to go an alternate route to that, which for me showed up as going and seeing an energy worker. And this is someone that works in the non-physical part of the body. And I went and saw this energy worker, and she said, how can I help you? And I said, well, I know we've only got an hour, but I'm depressed, I've got an alcohol addiction, I'm overweight, and I'm at rock bottom in my life. What can you do? And sure enough, she put me on the table, did some energy work on me. And at the end of that session, I went home that night, and I just felt something lift. It was like my head had come up out of the clouds. And for the first time in a long time, I experienced what it was like to think clearly again. Having had depression, it's like this fog that just, we're sitting in. And it was literally a breath of fresh air. I was like, oh my God, I forgot this is what it's like to, to think clearly. Then after that, something quite remarkable happened. I've always meditated, but whenever I meditated for the next week after that, I would have these huge downloads of energy that would rush through my body. And if anyone ever saw me during those meditations, they'd probably think I was having like an epileptic fit.
Wow.
It was so intense, this energy that was rushing through me, that my body would physically convulse. Yet on the inside, I was very calm, very serene, and I intuitively knew what was happening was a good thing. And I just had to let go and go with it.
Yeah.
And after a week, that stopped. Those downloads stopped. But somehow through that process, I don't quite know how to explain it, but I received an upgrade as part of that process. And after that, I just had a heightened sense of awareness. And when things would just leap out at me that were relevant for my healing journey. And so I'd come across something on the internet, and it would really leap out at me. And one thing led to another, and long story short, I imported these two technologies to begin with, brought them into my own house, and that started me on my uplift journey. Yeah.
Is that where the name come from?
That's where the name comes from, yeah. I think we've all experienced downward spirals in our life. And we can turn them around, and it's not, we don't have to get from point A to point Z. There's B, C, D, E, F all along the way. And so it's a journey, and it starts by doing one thing positive, and that then leads to another, which you might think, oh, I'm feeling a bit more energized, I can change my diet.
Yeah.
I change my diet, I can go to the gym, or I can go and meditate, or I can go and do Tai Chi, and it's this journey that begins an upward spiral.
Yeah. It's like falling in love. That really worked for me when I was a teenager. Suddenly, I wanted to be good at school again, and, do all these amazing things, get more exercise, and because I'm in love. And I guess you have to find these, what are they? Escalators that, topics, feeling states that you want to catch and uplift yourself, huh? Yeah.
And one leads to the other, which leads to the other, and you string enough of them together, and before long you find yourself in a completely different place. Yeah,
and so you found quite a few of those staircases, and you put them all into one room or into one building.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the different technologies that you have, and maybe pick a few? Because I've visited you, and it was amazing, the background that you gave me on those, and I think it would be really valuable for people just to get a little bit of the background. What do you reckon? Biocharger, is that a good one to start with, or?
Yeah, well, the two that I started with that to help me on my journey to wellness from depression and alcoholism was the biocharger and the oxygen therapy. And the biocharger, it really, for people that are not aware of it, it is a next level technology.
Well, it looks impressive to start with, right? Like, just that you guys get the picture. So this is like it's a tower that it sits on a podium, but the tower itself is about over 1/2 meter high. It has a lot of copper spirals around it.
A Tesla coil in it.
Right on.
Yeah.
For people who don't know what a Tesla coil is, look it up. It's an amazing piece of equipment, and it does a lot of good things, and it has a background that maybe we'll go into it a little bit, but it's massive. Many books have been written about it by now, and so it's a really impressive piece of equipment, and that helps to feel like, okay, this is serious. This will do something good for me. Yeah.
So the biocharger is more based, its wellness platform, it's more based in quantum physics than it is in biochemistry. And I think everyone can understand biochemistry because that's the prevailing medical mainstream that we're in, is pharmaceutical or biochemistry-based things in the whole. Mm-hmm. Whereas not as many people are familiar with how we can use quantum physics to help us heal. And so the biocharger definitely falls into this category of quantum physics.
Yeah.
And for many, that's a little bit of an abstract term, or it's quite a big subject. But I like to try and break it down and make it really simple for people, because one of the key findings that quantum physicists find is when they go and look at the very building blocks of what makes up us as human beings, mm-hmm. or even our reality for that matter, and that is the atom. What they find inside that atom when they look at it is that it's made up of 99.999% empty space. And once people wrap their head around that concept, that these atoms that make up us and make up all of our reality is made of 99.99% empty space, it's a little bit of a conundrum, because you think, well, how come, how do I exist in this physical world? But what those quantum physicists find in that empty space in the atom is energy. So the way I explain that to people is, rather than saying we are made up of atoms and therefore we are made up of 99.9% empty space, what I prefer to say is we are also made up of energy.
Which is voltage, right? Like like energy can be sometimes understood as like, oh, this is a spiritual funny thing. But, at the end of the day, we're talking about, you have more the vocabulary of voltage and frequency versus what the doctor would say, which is molecules and substance. But you're basically saying, well, if you would go deeper into molecules and substance, you end up with your vocabulary anyway, right?
Yeah, energy. Yeah, energy's can be a nebulous term, but most people can relate to the fact that we're not just physical beings; we are energetic beings, and I guess that's the starting point to understanding the biocharger, because once we accept that paradigm that we're not just physical beings, we are also energetic beings, it then makes complete sense that we can use energy to influence the part of us that's non-physical, the energetic part of our beingness. And to put that into some context, many people can relate to the fact that they can go to a chiropractor who can physically manipulate their body to improve their health. And once we accept that we're also energetic beings, it also means we can then use energy to manipulate our energy body to improve our health. And that's what the biocharger does. It uses 3 different types of subtle energies. They are electrodynamic energy, or voltage, which is produced through a Tesla coil. They use pulsed electromagnetic fields, or frequencies, and this is often the Rife technology that's built into it. And it also uses photonic light energy. And those 3 things combine to affect us at a cellular level. And when people come in, we explain that in much greater detail. But I guess the key concept of that is we can use energy to influence the energetic state of our being, and we can use that to influence at a cellular level. And probably to take a step back, the foundation that Quantum Uplift is built on is these 3 pillars. We're very much focused on cellular rejuvenation, but in addition to that, we're also focused on cellular detoxification and also cellular upgrade. And the reason why we focus so much on cellular health is because a lot of the modern medical research points to that many chronic illnesses stem from some level of cellular dysfunction or metabolic dysfunction. So, rather than focus on symptoms or rather than focus on individual organs, what we focus on is we go as far upstream as we possibly can to the cells and even inside the cells, the mitochondria inside the cells, and we focus on how can we improve our cellular health with the view that if we can get our cells working more efficiently, more effectively, then the energy that they produce flows downstream to the body and influences our organs, our tissues, our joints, and things like that. And it's really the body that has the innate intelligence to know how to heal ourselves. So we're very much focused on cellular rejuvenation, detoxification, and upgrading. And the biocharger works a treat at doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I can see how you treat more the foundation of the body and of the person when you go to the cells, rather than treating an overall condition that is a result and is a result of the foundation, what happens on the foundation below. So if you don't go all the way down there, it's a little bit like a farmer trying to figure out a disease of the plants. If you don't have a good soil, if you don't water your plants, if they don't get enough of the right weather, they will show symptoms. But, let's say, they have a particular pest on it. You can take the pest off, but the pest came there because there was a weak plant. And I guess it's a little bit like that, huh? Going into the cells?
Yeah, following with that analogy, the plant might show up with some tarnished leaves or something like that, and that's the symptom. But the root cause of it is down at the roots, and it's at a level where the plants are either taking in nutrients or conversely taking in toxins.
Yeah.
And when it comes time for cellular health, that's important. Our cells, they not only need the right nutrients, but we also, what is impacting a lot of cellular health are toxins.
Yeah.
And in the modern society that we live in today, the toxins are abound, and they impact our cellular functioning. So the more we can detoxify our cells, the more we're letting our cells do what they're designed to do and work properly. And that's where our health comes from, is from having fully functioning cells.
Great. Yeah.
And just another interesting point, this, we talked about toxins in the cells and nutrients, but what's quite often missing in the modern vocabulary is that cells also need voltage. And this is coming back to the biocharger, why it impacts us at a cellular level. And a lot of this work comes from Dr. Jerry Tennant, and he's an ophthalmologist, and he had his own health journey, but through his research, he discovered that healthy cells have a voltage of minus 25 millivolts.
Okay.
Minus is not a bad thing. It's just electrical convention. When they're electron donors, they get assigned a negative sign. If they're electron stealers, they get assigned a positive sign. So healthy cells have a voltage of minus 25 millivolts. But when our cells need to repair and replicate, which they're doing all the time, like, for example, the rods and cones in our eyes, those cells, they're being replicated every 48 hours.
Wow.
The cells in the lining of your stomach,
Yeah.
every 3 days, they're new cells. The skin that you're in now is 6 weeks old. In 6 weeks' time, you're going to be in a completely new skin. Okay. And so for our cells to undergo this process of repairing and replicating, they don't just need minus 25 millivolts, they need minus 50 millivolts. So they need twice as much voltage. So what's often missing with the current view of cellular health, many people are familiar that it needs the right nutrients and we need to get toxins out. But there's a third component, and that is we need the right voltage. Because if we don't have the right voltage, then the cells don't have what they need to do their repair and replicating process. And the biocharger adds voltage to our cells.
So that's something that is actually, even from a scientific point of view, really clearly understood, if the right voltage is there. Actually, I've heard that if you look into cancer cells, those are the cells that normally have not enough negative, like there's not even cancer, but like if you look at cells that are not quite healthy and that create sort of unhealthy replications of themselves when they're split and that type of thing. There's a certain voltage level. When you go below that, then you really see disease, eh?
Yeah, one of the common things you'll find across any chronic illness, if you look at the cells, is they'll have low cellular voltage. So cancer, you mentioned, has a voltage of around about plus 25 millivolts. Healthy cells, minus 25 millivolts. And so as our cellular voltage drops, our acidity increases. So there's a relationship between voltage and pH. In fact, voltage measures pH in solution. And so just as
Same
our
thing. Yeah.
it's the same thing. So if you take a pH meter,
Yes.
it'll often have two readings. It'll read pH, which is on a logarithmic scale between 1 and 14, 0 and 14. And it'll also read out in millivolts. And so it just depends, which is a linear scale. So as our cellular vault, most people are familiar with the concept that if we create an acidic environment in our body, that's an environment that, you know, disease will more likely flourish in. That's the same thing as voltage dropping, because there's a direct correlation between voltage and pH. Okay, so when we use the biocharger, we're adding voltage into our cells, which also then increases the alkalinity of our cells and things like that. And our cells need voltage to work properly. Yeah.
So you can actually stand in front of the biocharger or sit in front of it, have a session with it, and then your pH level of your body would actually have changed potentially? Is that as fast as it goes?
I've never actually measured the pH before and afterwards, but I've seen live red blood cell analysis of people before and afterwards, and you can visually see before where their cells have a rouleau effect, where they're all stacked up to on top of each other.
Because they're positive.
Yeah, because they lose their charge, and so they all stick together. And that creates an environment for disease in the body, because the cells, the cell membranes, if they're all stuck together, they can't let nutrients in and waste products out. So I like to explain to people like this: if you had your home and you couldn't get any nutrients into your home, and you couldn't take the trash out or the sewage out, it wouldn't be long before you're living in a toxic environment. And most people can relate to that quite well. It's the same for our cells. If they lose their voltage, they lose their electrical charge around the outside of the cells, they start to stick together. As they stick together, the surface area of the cell membrane becomes shorter, compromised. The cells can't let the nutrients in, they can't let the waste products out, so we have lower cellular functioning, and then that leads to disease. If we get voltage into the cells, they develop a positive electrical charge around the outside of the cell membrane. Just like two positive magnets repel each other, positive electrical charges repel each other. The cells start to operate far more independently, much higher surface area of the cell membrane, more efficient nutrients in, waste products out, better cellular functioning. Better cellular functioning, better you.
Yeah. And what you're saying there is something that we've heard from other guests in very different modalities, whether you have Chinese medicine that talks about the meridians and how they need to get unblocked, because that's actually an electronic and information highway as well. We had people talking about the earthing, you know, and what it actually does when you walk bare feet on the earth. And again, it talks about uptake of ions, which are negatively charged, and then they negatively charge the whole body. So it's the same. Well, it's the same topic basically. And then I guess when we actually infrared saunas do that too, because they release ions as well, so they give you a negative charge there. And if I think about it, so that's one aspect of the biocharger. So you're in a field that actually gives all the mitochondria, the core of the cell, that particular charge. But I remember you talking about Dr. Rees, wasn't it?
Dr. Rife.
The Rife.
Yeah.
Also looking at what does it prevent happening in the body in terms of diseases when you use certain frequencies and electric, what's the word, potentials. Can you speak a little bit to that? Because I found that's a great additional benefit, not only that we basically supercharge the body and really get it back to its normal negative voltage, but also that other things can't necessarily live in us when that voltage exists, that negative one.
Yeah, so within the biocharger, there are three different types of technologies. One is voltage that we've spoken about, which is produced through a Tesla coil. Another one, it has actually a multi-wave oscillator in there, and this is a work of Dr. Lakowski. And it also has Rife frequencies in there. So a number of people are familiar with Rife. He's becoming more and more popular now, but he was in the 1920s. And he was a brilliant scientist, brilliant physician, and in fact, he was the first person that could see living viruses. And living viruses are very, very, very small. And what he did is he developed this thing called the universal microscope. And he was able to get that microscope to magnify up to 60,000 times. And that's a huge level of magnification back in the 1920s.
Gee, yeah.
And today they've got the electron microscope that does magnify to that degree and more. But the challenge with today's microscope, the electron microscope, is it kills everything that it looks at because it bombards them with photons.
Yeah.
Rife's microscope, he could see living viruses that are very, very small. And so what he did, and through his research, he found that every single virus, pathogen or bacteria has a certain, what he termed mortal oscillatory rate, which basically means a certain frequency that would kill it. And so what he would do is he'd isolate out these viruses, he'd put them under the slide under his microscope at high levels of magnification. He could see them flopping around living. And then he would painstakingly change the frequency that he bombarded them with until he could visibly observe them die. Mm-hmm. And when he saw them die, he said, okay, that frequency kills that virus, and he would catalogue it. And then he'd go on to do another one, another one, another one. He solved tuberculosis in the 1920s. And 1934, he went on to tackle cancer. And he did a full clinical study, which was backed by the University of Southern California, USC in the States. The university put 5 other independent peer-reviewed doctors on the panel to give the clinical trial objectivity, to oversee it. They gave him 16 stage 4 cancer patients, and he cured 16 out of 16 in a little over 3 months, just using frequency alone, no other interventions.
Yes.
And that was in 1934. Wow. And look, unfortunately, yet today, very few people have heard of Dr. Rife. And without delving too much into his story, suffice to say that he kind of pushed up against the mainstream medical establishment, and unfortunately, maybe the time wasn't right for that to come forth. But his work continued on. He continued, and he met a bit of a demise. He ended up, his life was crushed through all of the challenges he went through trying to bring his technology out. But his work continued underground, and it continues to this day. And there's this huge body of work which is now called frequency medicine. And frequencies have evolved where rather than just killing different viruses, pathogens, bacteria, they can be used to influence your mood, or they can be used to influence your hormones and things like this. So this is biophysics as opposed to biochemistry. So biochemistry works through 2 molecules, colliding together and forming a chemical reaction, whereas biophysics works more through the interactions of energy.
So an example for biophysics would be what's a common medical, like, would you use I don't know, like paracetamol or something like that, or?
No, well, that'd be biochemistry, paracetamol, but something like even a MRI, magnetic resonance imagery, that's using more biophysics. That's using magnetic resonance, and that's using imagery. Yeah. So that's an example of using physics and biophysics and things like that. And so, it's this whole emerging level of wellness and medicine is using energy as opposed to just chemistry.
Oh, that's exciting.
And both are equally important, but each of them have their different places.
Yeah, exactly. And I think through whatever story we have experienced over the last 50 years or so, we've focused more on the physics, probably because it's easier to see as well and to measure, and maybe it just got a little bit more dominant for whatever reason. What I want to know is, now if that can be positive, are there also frequencies that are not good for us? And I have a few in mind that I've that people would say definitely not good for it. But would there be one that I don't know? You say there are really specific frequencies that kill influenza or certain things, tackle cancer cells as well. So would there be some that are actually not good for positive bacteria or for the human as a whole?
I think there's at the moment there's a lot of concern about the 5G technology that's coming through, and that's creating a lot of concern. And I think there's a bunch of studies that are coming out that are probably confirming that. I think it also comes down to the amount of exposure that you have to it and the intensity of it. I think one of the challenges with 5G is it's just such a overwhelming technology that's being blasted on us 24/7, as opposed to going and getting a therapeutic dose for a few minutes. So more is not always best, and so 24/7 bombarded with just one particular frequency can distort our electromagnetic field, because we emit an electromagnetic field. We're not just these physical beings, we're also these energetic beings, and they've got instruments now that measure that. They're called SQUID instruments. It's an acronym. I can't quite pronounce what that acronym stands for, but and that will measure our electromagnetic field up to 15 feet.
Yeah.
And so, this is no longer the so-called hippie speak that we're energetic beings. And, they're now showing through Heart Math organisation that our heart emits this electromagnetic field. And so with energy, if you bombard one field constantly 24/7 with a certain frequency or energy, it's going to distort that field. It's going to create an interference pattern in that field. And I think that can then lead to disease, as opposed to using therapeutic, where it's very specific and targeted and for short periods of time.
Right. Yeah. Maybe we have a technology in our infrared saunas to prevent the EMF and the ELF, so magnetic and electronic, to come through our heaters. So basically they're shielded, they're grounded, so that the person sits in a space where there's not that frequency. And I've been thinking, at one stage, especially when you're in cities and you see all the Wi-Fi surrounded, maybe we should actually kit out our saunas completely, so that it's actually sort of like a cell where nothing comes from outside. It doesn't feel natural either, but I've seen wallpapers built like that, so that you actually take this frequency down. On the other hand, why not using frequency that is actually healing for this transmission anyway? Just imagine if 5G would be actually one that is just anti-flu 5G. Well, would it be possible? Maybe it is, maybe not. Maybe the curve is not quite right. But I've heard people saying, look, we chose a particular band to transmit for mobile phones, but and for just electricity, but there would have been actually options that would have been less harmful to the field of the body.
Quite possibly, yes. And it's an emerging science, so we'll see what comes. If someone can come up with a healthy version of 5G, that would be amazing.
Exciting.
Yeah.
The future is bright. And if people want to learn more about the biocharger in particular, I know you have a lot of really informative information, including videos as well, on your website, on the Quantum Uplift website, and really recommend to check that out for sure. Should we look at a different technology?
Sure. I guess we've got a number in there. Oxygen, that was the second one that I actually came across, and we call this super oxygen saturation therapy. And again, this works at a cellular level. And I love this therapy. I think you've tried it, and it's something that I always get off the oxygen feeling so much better than when I got on it. And there's a reason why we can go months without food, days without water, minutes without oxygen. It is that vital to our survival. And the way the super oxygen saturation therapy works, as the name implies, it super saturates all of our cells, the 100 trillion odd cells in our bodies, with up to 4 times more oxygen, or 400% more oxygen what they normally get. And oxygen is required by our cells, or our mitochondria within our cells, to produce their biological energy, which is called ATP. And so the way the super oxygen saturation therapy works is we have some oxygen concentrators, and they pump 85% oxygen into a big bag, a reservoir. We connect to that reservoir via a hose and a breathing mask, and we do some exercise, either treadmill or bike or sitting down, lifting weights, whatever the body's capable of doing. The purpose of the exercise is to get elevated heart rate or flow rate of blood, because our blood is roughly 90% water, blood plasma, plus it's got red blood cells, and the blood's a liquid. And the higher the flow rate of the liquid, the more oxygen, which is a gas, will dissolve into that liquid. And so we do some exercise to increase the oxygenation of our blood, and to supersaturate our blood with that enriched oxygen. But after we've done that for about 5 minutes, and the reason why we do that, by the way, is because oxygen is a very potent anti-inflammatory. And so, it doesn't matter what the chronic illness is these days, as we age, we all tend to seem to build up this systemic low-level inflammation in our cells and in our body that just keeps creeping up and creeping up and creeping up. And it's kind of a bit like the frog in the pot. You've heard that analogy. You put a frog in a cold pot and you slowly heat it up, it won't jump out. But you put it into a hot pot, it leaps straight back out.
Yeah.
And we have this inflammation that systemically just builds and builds and builds throughout our life. And eventually it gets to a point where it shows up in some form of a chronic illness. And you can name any chronic illness that you like, and inflammation is a precursor to just about all of them. And so oxygen, it's a potent anti-inflammatory, and particularly within our cardiovascular network, it's a very potent anti-inflammatory, takes inflammation out of the body, out of the cardiovascular network. And so after we've saturated the body with oxygen, we then we flick a switch and we deprive it of oxygen. We start breathing from a second reservoir that only has 14% oxygen. And what this does is it simulates training at altitude. So as we go higher into the mountains, the air gets thinner, there's less oxygen, everything's more challenging for the body. And your brain, or everyone's brain, uses about 20% of their body's oxygen demands. So we go from sea level to about 11,000 feet in 1 second. We flick this switch, and it's not as intense as it sounds, but your brain quickly recognizes it's in a different environment. It's in a low oxygen environment. So what the brain does, it's signals to the body to adapt to this environment and to become more efficient in how it uses oxygen, because there's not as much there. And the way it signals to the body, it signals for the heart rate to go up, it signals for the cardiovascular network to dilate, and it signals to our skeletal system to produce some more red blood cells. But the main thing we're looking for in there is the cardiovascular network to dilate, because when we get inflammation in the cardiovascular network and particularly the capillaries, which are those fine hair-like veins that deliver oxygen to all of our cells and tissues, what happens is the diameter of those capillaries gets choked at the venous end of it, and it doesn't allow oxygen to get through to the cells. And when that happens, our cells, instead of using oxygen to burn glucose to produce energy, they switch to operating and they ferment glucose to produce energy, which cellular energy is measured as ATP. And this is an anaerobic pathway that they're using. And when they operate anaerobically without oxygen, they'll only produce 2 units of ATP, cellular energy, and a whole bunch of lactate or lactic acid, which makes us feel stiff and sore. If we can get them to dilate and open up, which was what happens at altitude, and get oxygen through, they switch their mechanism back to operating aerobically. And when cells use oxygen to burn glucose, they produce 38 units of ATP and drains lactic acid. And this is why the experience of most people when they come off the oxygen therapy is they feel more energized, more alert, because we've all got these pockets of inflammation in our body, which is called, and areas of low oxygen in our cells, which is called hypoxia. And if we can reverse the hypoxia, those cells, instead of producing 2 units of ATP, switch back to producing 38 units of ATP. So it's like having a car that we knew went faster when we were younger. We're getting 38 miles to the gallon. And over time, parts of it, it's only getting 2 miles to the gallon and it's not going as efficiently. And the super oxygen saturation therapy has a way of reversing that, getting us back to, operating more efficiently, producing, in the analogy, 38 miles to the gallon again without energy.
Right. I guess the body probably has a way to, just by breathing better, already to increase to certain level and bring more oxygen into the body, right? That's just my feeling. And thinking about it, if something really emotionally challenging, or when I'm really tired, I don't breathe properly, and I know that I don't have much energy. And when someone actually said, "All right, now breathe properly, just breathe for a couple of moments," it brings it back in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. And quite often we get stuck into shallow breathing and we don't breathe fully throughout our body. So we're into shallow breathing, and we're not oxygenating our cells as much. And in one level, that's one of the benefits of why exercise is so good for us. It really makes us breathe heavily and breathe in oxygen. Yeah. Or yoga and pranayamas and things like that.
The Wim Hof method.
Wim Hof is kind of using that similar mechanism where it's trying to deprive people of oxygen through holding breath and things like that, and then fully oxygenating the body. I guess what the technology that we have does is it does that to a much greater degree. Yeah. And so it uses some technology and altitude to limit the amount of oxygen that the cells get and then it floods it with 4 times more oxygen. And this is kind of part of the secret sauce, I guess, because no matter how hard you breathe with doing normal breathing exercises, you're only going to breathe in 21% oxygen, versus on the super oxygen saturation therapy, you're breathing in 85% oxygen.
Wow.
And that's why exercise is easier. So sometimes if we're out of shape and we don't really feel like exercising and the thought of it's really hard, if you exercise with 4 times more oxygen, you're going to find that process a lot easier because your cells are going to recover 4 times more faster.
Wow. So in a sense, I could come in every morning to your clinic and have a session with hypersaturated, what would you call it? Like the air hypersaturated with oxygen. And it would reduce the inflammation because of what you were explaining. And as I keep going every day with that, I would see an effect even if I may not change anything else in my life.
You will definitely see some changes happen in your life. And as I said, even within one session, most people notice a difference between when they start the session and when they get off at the end of the session in terms of their energy. It also pushes up to 4 times more oxygen across your blood-brain barrier. And so it gives you a cognitive enhancement, a cognitive lift, because our brains just work much better when they're fully oxygenated. We think more clearly. And this is one of the things that helped bring me out of depression. I was using the biocharger. I was increasing the voltage in my body. I was then super saturating it with oxygen. And you increase the voltage, you increase the oxygen to your cells, they just work better. Therefore, you work better.
So plants create oxygen. And I would expect that around plants and in a forest, there's more oxygen than maybe in a city. So would you say that there's certainly a benefit for people, beside many other relaxation benefits and what have you, for getting out of environments that don't have oxygen-producing plants in it and actually go into more pristine natural? So that alone would be a good way to look after your body? Absolutely.
And, this is something that I loved. We've got this super oxygen saturation therapy in our clinic and I love it. But, on a weekend, I love going to the rainforest that we have close by here, Mount Warning or any of the national parks, and just being in the rainforest and just, breathing deeply in that rainforest and that, those negative ions and things like that, where there's, waterfalls and trickling water. And so, there are many, many, many natural ways that we can do this, but the key concept is our cells need oxygen, and the more we can super oxygenate them, we can produce more energy in our cells. I guess the difference with what we use with the technology, this is getting into this field of biohacking, where we're actually deliberately triggering a physiological response in the body as a way of getting more oxygen in than what we would normally do, no matter where we were. So even if we're in the rainforest, which is a wonderful thing to do, and we should do that as much as we possibly can, absolutely. But by depriving the body of oxygen and making your cardiovascular network open up and expand, and then flooding it with 4 times more oxygen than what it normally gets, and then depriving it, and then flooding it, and then depriving it and flooding it. This is the biohacking mechanism that gets us super oxygenated, and it gives us an upgrade. We just work better.
Yeah.
And this is, originally where this technology came from was back in 1970s, the East German Dr. von Arden, the East Germans they didn't have a big pharmaceutical industry, so they had to come up with cheap and effective ways to help improve their health. And so Dr. von Arden was tasked with finding ways to do that, and he used exercise with oxygen therapy. So it started off being called EWOT, which is an acronym which stands for exercise with oxygen therapy. He's done this incredible body of work showing all the scientific benefits of that. By the way, when he incorporates that with sauna, what he's done this work with oxygenating the body and then including that with sauna, it has a way of dumping oxygen into the cells, because the oxygen, how it attaches to the hemoglobin, is temperature sensitive. So when you're combining oxygen with sauna, you get this another great effect with that as well.
Just on that also, he wouldn't have done that with infrared saunas, but I know infrared saunas create something that's called vessel dilation, which really opens up the pathways or the vessels so much more and takes trash out, if we were say, and bring nutrients to the cells. But that would be also true for oxygen, there would also be so much more brought to the cells because of it.
Yeah, and because we are creating vasodilation. That's exactly what we're doing. Through altitude, we're creating vasodilation.
Yeah.
And it's making the body, open up, and those vessels open up, which yes does get the oxygen through and enriches it, and then that starts that process of detoxification, which. That's people need to be mindful of that, is they can get some mild detox effects when they do this, because it does, when your cells, are depleted of oxygen, they're not working that well, they build up metabolic waste. And we start to open up these channels, flood them with oxygen. The very first thing they do is they clean house, and they can dump some of that metabolic waste. So what that means is some people can get some mild detox effects when they come and do the super oxygen saturation therapy for the first 1 or 2 times, but this happens to about 15% of people. But after that, they have this real uplift of energy and clearer focus and things like that. So, this biohacking, it's I guess a common term right now, but what it means is we can use technology to radically improve our health. And what I like about it so much is that it's drug-free, it's non-toxic, no side effects, and it just makes you perform better.
Yep.
And I think the more things we can do that fit into that category, of being, just drug-free, non-toxic, no side effects, then the better our health will be. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's a new movement definitely for going to these upgrades and these ways of living a more enriched life and a healthier life way earlier than when something is wrong with the body. It does help to get sick, as we know about yourself, otherwise you might have not taken that path. And I know for myself that was similar, not as extreme as your case, but definitely gets you off the couch to do something. But it feels like the younger generation just is inspired by health and well-being and vibrancy, and the biohacking field and community is a great one, because people just understand that there is a way smarter and faster way to protect yourself from certain things, and that includes actually viruses. And it's a quite topical thing at the moment. It would be actually great just to touch base on the principles of like why viruses attack us and what you can do about it, because similar to a computer, a virus doesn't exist without the computer. And in our case, that would be our house, our body, I guess, that is needed actually for the virus to exist. So do you have a little bit of a way to look at it more from the electrical, bio what would you say, sort of the frequency and electrical side of things, rather than from the physical ones?
Yeah, certainly. So, it is quite topical at the moment, and I'm not sure when this is going to go to air, but, we're in the middle of, the coronavirus, which is, going around the world and creating a lot of panic. And what's not been put out there by the media is explaining to people what are things they can do to, naturally help themselves protect against viruses. Because the way viruses work is a virus, like what you said, it needs a host to operate in and live in, and that host is our cells. And so a virus will attach to a cell via the membrane. So the virus has a membrane, our cells have a membrane, and those two membranes fuse together. But the way they fuse together, it's pH dependent. So in a more acidic environment, the viruses tend to thrive more, as opposed to in a more alkaline environment. And different viruses have different pHs where it's what's called their infection rate. Infection rate, increases or decreases based on the pH.
So exactly what you said a little bit earlier is basically the electricity of our cells and the pH that results out of that has a lot to do with how receptive our body is to an infection of a virus? Exactly.
So like I said before, voltage measures pH in solution. Okay, voltage, it works in milliamps or amps, and pH is on a logarithmic scale. But it's measuring the same thing. It's measuring, pH is measuring voltage in solution. So the way we can use these technologies to help, fortify us against viruses is, apart from using specific frequencies to try and, kill those viruses and things like that, we can increase our immunity or our cells' defense against these viruses, because if we add voltage to our cells, it increases the alkalinity. And as it increases the alkalinity, the ability for the virus to actually fuse with the cell membrane becomes compromised. And so this current coronavirus, it is a new virus, but coronaviruses as a general virus, they've done a lot of study on coronaviruses, and there are other strains of coronaviruses that they've studied that at a pH of 6, it's very infectious. But at a pH of 7, the infection rate drops tenfold, which is 1,000%.
Yeah.
So by increasing the alkalinity or the voltage in our cells, helps protect them. And then our cells, in order to produce biological energy, they need oxygen, right? Oxygen, the way our cells produce ATP is ultimately our food gets broken down into electrons, and the electrons move through this thing in the mitochondria called the electron transport chain, and it combines with oxygen to produce ATP. And not a single biological function happens in anyone's body without ATP being produced. And for ATP, it needs oxygen. So if we increase the alkalinity, we increase the voltage in the cells, it reduces the ability for the virus to attach to the host cell. And if we increase the oxygenation of our cells, it produces more ATP. Therefore, we have more biological energy to fight the virus.
Wow. That's amazing. And I love that principle to it. I looked into it a little bit, and I looked into the SARS virus because that's long over, and, it's all good now, and wasn't too bad, but there was certainly a threat perceived, and people looked into what can you actually do to prevent it, what does the virus do, and by the sounds of it, that has already happened for the coronavirus. That's a sad story that's not broadcasted as well as, like, what can you do beside buying toilet paper, which happens in Australia. It's sold out at the moment. Can I just ask you, there's certainly also some substances. When I looked into the SARS virus, it was certainly vitamin C, high doses of vitamin C, 2 grams in the morning, 2 grams at night, or when you don't have symptoms. When you have symptoms, as much as you can, it is really said in some properly reviewed medical papers, and it makes a huge difference, eh?
Absolutely. So this comes back to, cell, what do we need to do to make cells work properly? And that's the premise of what Quantum Uplift's all about. We're a cellular detoxification, cellular rejuvenation, cellular upgrade clinic. So to make cells work well, we need to reduce toxins. Mm-hmm. That's a great thing about saunas, right? It helps take toxins out of the cells. They need voltage, which we've discussed. They need minus 25 millivolts to operate normally, minus 50 millivolts to replicate. And they also need nutrition. They need the building blocks for them to work properly. And without all those three, then you're going to have compromised cellular function. And when it comes time for nutrition, there's things that we can do that help fortify our cells. And these are things like you mentioned, high dose vitamin C. That's an excellent one. Iodine. This is nature's own antibiotic. It's antiviral, powerful, antifungal, antimicrobial. It's nature's own antibiotic. So we can increase our iodine. Zinc and selenium are strong for the immune system. Glutathione, our body's own natural antioxidant. So by fortifying ourselves with these quality supplements, we're giving our cells what they need to work properly. And if we give our cells what they need, the body has this innate intelligence to know how to defend itself. And so it is a little bit sad that in the media it's not really been reported what people can do apart from wash their hands and things like that. And it kind of begs the question why. Why is this knowledge is known by the people that are studying this? Why is this information not being broadcasted? I don't necessarily want to go into that. People can draw their own conclusions. Why that may be, but it's a little bit sad that there are things that people can do to help minimise these effects.
Yeah. What's good, I guess, in a sense, is that mass media they dilute so much, so they're less controlled. There are many more channels, and so knowledge comes through that maybe otherwise would have been swept off the agenda, even just because it's maybe not as interesting and dramatic. That alone could be like, it's one thing to say danger, that sells. Like, when it bleeds, it sells. Oh no, when it bleeds, it leads. I think that's a typical newspapers saying, you know.
Sure.
But prevention is not really as sexy, and I'm really confident that especially smaller countries will just go more and more to prevention. Will do the thing. The statistics will just show clearly that they have a healthier population that is really thriving, and they have less degenerative diseases. And there will be no chance for maybe bigger countries that are less progressive to follow that statistic, because it makes happier people, and that's good for the GDP, and everyone wants a good GDP. So I think there's certainly, I can see a positive path of this actually working all very well.
It will work itself out. Yes, or will adapt.
Yeah. Hey, there's so much more that I would love to talk to you about, but I think I'll finish with three questions that we ask every visitor. Mm-hmm. And the first one is, what drives you to get out of bed every morning?
That's a great question. When I wake up, I described my journey earlier, and I describe it as a pain to purpose journey. And for 7 years, I was in a lot of pain, which was depression, alcoholism, things like this. And and I meet many people every day that are in their own pain in various different ways. And the one thing which I share with them is, quite often within that, there is a gift that's waiting for us. And if we can just solve the riddle, if we can just find our way out of it, there's often a gift within that. And for me, all I wanted to do was be well. And there's often a saying, if we're unwell, we only have really one real goal, and that's to be well. So that was my driving force, was to be well. But after I was able to achieve that for myself, I was basically guided spiritually to go and open up this clinic. So for me, I've always been a spiritual person, and I've tended to try and follow that when I hear that inner guidance. And we all have this ability to tap into, I'll call it the quantum field, other people will call it source. It goes by various different names. Doesn't matter what the name is. We can tap into something that is greater than ourselves, and that can guide us. And for me, that's where Quantum Uplift came from. It came through me. And I've had many other businesses before, and I run this one quite differently in that rather than using my head to try and drive the business, I actually try and get out of my head and try and merge with the field and just let that guidance come through, and it directs me. And that's how I found these various different technologies. Like I said, I had, after that week of meditation where I had these huge downloads, I got some type of an upgrade. I can't explain it, but I just had a heightened sense of awareness, and these things would leap out at me. Various different things would leap out at me, and it'd say, "Get this one, not that one." And it's this little whisper. And for me, clairaudience is my stronger sense, and we've all got these different senses, right? So through following that, I've found myself, and then it said, "Now open a clinic." And it's like, really, me? And so, and initially, we have all these self-doubts and things like that as we go, but I've learnt to just let go and have faith in that higher guidance. So what drives me every morning? I wake up every day, and before I open my eyes, I sit there and I say, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm just very, very grateful for the fact that this is coming through me. And I also sit there and, the way I market the clinic, I sit in front of the biocharger under the quantum field lights, which we haven't talked about. And I just merge, I try and get literally out of my mind, out of my body, and I just merge with that field, and I just put the intention into the field. Please, whoever it is that needs to find us, let them find us. And, I won't say daily, but definitely weekly, we have people that walk in our door that says that have all sorts of stories on how they came to be where they are. and I just sit there and smile, and I just go, thank you, And so it's really gratitude. What drives me is gratitude, and knowing that it's not really me that's doing it, and the more that I can be of service is what makes me happier. Yeah.
Beautiful. Oh, that's a great driver. That's just like falling in love every morning over and over again. a contemporary question would be, what are you in at the moment? Like, what's the thing that you're researching right now that you're really excited about that you do? Or exercise or whatever it is, like just something that at the moment is going on for you.
Well, right at this point in time, I've got some really important meetings coming up to do with the business and things like that. And so this week I've been combining intermittent fasting with sauna and the different technologies we have at Quantum. And I just find that when I get into when I start to use all these things in synergy, you get a synergistic effect. So each of these different technologies, they all work beautifully by themselves, independently by themselves. You don't think that you need all of these things for it to work. But when you start combining one with another and you start leveraging them, you get this. And sorry to use the term, but you get this uplift, you get this upgrade. So for example, you do intermittent fasting, and you start to burn ketones instead of glucose. The brain works better on ketones. It's like having this clean fuel, like for the brain. And then you combine that with voltage and oxygen, and you combine that together. And then you go have a sauna and it will dump all this oxygen into your cells, and then you come out and you have a great night's sleep. Don't overrate, you have a wonderful night's sleep after a sauna. You just feel so relaxed. And I'm really just enjoying the process of just watching and experiencing and feeling how different my life is when I do these, these simple things. And, fasting's another one. It's as ancient technology as we can possibly come across yet. It's such a wonderful thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And the last question we have for our guests always is, what in your mind is the reason that we exist and are here?
That's a great question. At the end of the day, this is my own personal belief, is we're all one. We're all connected. We are one consciousness. And consciousness seems to separate itself out from itself. And we have this physical experience. And when we have this physical experience, life, it's denser, it's rich, it's denser and it's richer. And I'll put this into some context so it doesn't sound so abstract. Hopefully not. But originally, in my earlier days, like you mentioned, I was studying chemical engineering. I was very analytical, very in my head, quite arrogant, young, and headstrong. And I was also an atheist. Right, I just didn't believe in anything. And if science didn't prove it, then it didn't exist.
Yeah.
Right. And that nearly drove me to having a nervous breakdown at about the age of 23. And through that, I went to learn how to meditate so I could just help pass my uni exams and get through and cope. And so through, it wasn't meditation at the time. I went and did this seminar that said, come and learn about the power of your mind, And so my chemical engineering brain went, yes, that's what I need. But really what I was doing was learning how to meditate. They just called it a different name. And through that meditative experience, I started having metaphysical experiences, experiences that were beyond the physics. And so, one of my I would see things happen before they happened. So I started to question whether time was linear, so if you see something happen before it's happened, then how does that happen? And so, time, I can tell you it's not linear, right? I then started having experiences where I had out-of-body experiences where I'd actually leave my body and I would look down and there's my physical body and I'm not there, but I'm not dead, so what's all that mean? And once the genie's out of the bottle, you can't put it back. You can't undo that experience. It is so transformative that it's impossible to undo it. And so that started this quest and through wanting to understand, metaphysics and things like that, I've gone on to have many, many other experiences like that. But what that's led me to, my understanding, is that we're all connected, we're all one, and that we come into the physical realm, this physical plane, to experience richness, to experience contrast. And when you're out of your body, for those who've had an out-of-body experience, it's a wonderful, liberating experience. It's just like, oh my God, this is amazing. It's so free and it's so liberating. And when you come back into your body, it's like, this is like driving a tank. You know, it's like really slow and it's really heavy. You know, like, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
But in this physical realm, it's got rich contrast. We've got emotion. You know, we've got these ups and downs and all these things, and it's very rich in contrast and things like that. Versus when we're in spirit, it's you know, it's quite magnanimous as well. It's you know, beautiful. So I think, you know, why are we here? I think we're here to discover that we're all one, we're all connected, and that you know, I heard I have a guru who has since passed, and he described it like this. He said, "I separated myself from myself so that I could love myself." And you know, I think that's it. It's you know, at the end of the day, we are these loving beings. And
beautiful, yeah,
and, that's how I'd best describe it.
Yeah. No, thank you. That's wonderful, and I really relate to that. And you know, you would see in your clinic people that come in stressed and angry and no vision and no interest in living anymore, or just surviving. And well, when we put our body back together and support it properly, suddenly they're loving, giving, you know, really awake and really joyous people that we actually are. And I think it's a good indicator. When I see that I'm there, then I know my body is happy too, and the spirit comes with it. Hey.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for everything that you shared. I thought it was a really, really beautiful interview. I really enjoyed it. And I do have to point out, you know, you're in Byron Bay. So if anyone wants to experience the Quantum Uplift experience and all the different modalities that you have, you know, that can be customized for people, of course, as well. And I know you take so much time explaining people actually what it is all about. So it's highly, highly recommended. Your website is a great source of knowledge around all these different modalities. So really appreciate you putting that time in there as well to educate people on that. And it is for people who looking, you know, to solve certain issues, but of course also just people to get an upgrade and, you know, become more vibrant in their health. And I really appreciate that you can do both really with what you have built there. So thank you so much.
It's our pleasure, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, great. Just really quickly, what's your website that you would lead people
it's
to?
quantumuplift.com. And similar with our Instagram and Facebook and things like that. Yeah, Quantum Uplift.
Okay, at Quantum Uplift.
Yeah, at Quantum Uplift. Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah,
wonderful.
all one word.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Ashoka. Really, really appreciate it. It was great to have you.
Thank you.